the lightning round will return for the open reading. So it is time, though, to welcome our feature reader into the word of mouth virtual room, Dick Westheimer. And Dick, as self-described in his biography, and let me pause for a second and say that Dick communicated to me that, well, I don't have a book, and I'm wondering if I have enough to say in my biography. And my answer to him was, I don't care, because I've heard your voice. It matters, and that is what is most important. But that said, Dick has, for over 40 years, as he described to me, lived in the company of his wife, Debbie, and gardened and raised 5 children on their plot of land in Claremont County, Ohio. After years of writing songs and essays, he took up with poets. You'll be sorry for the rest of your life. And the writing of poetry on November 8th, 2016. I assume he had a revelatory moment, as we all have at one time or another. In the company of his newfound poet friends and his own poems, he has begun to live and learn the art of listening. So with that, please welcome Dick Westheimer into the room. Dick, the floor is yours.
Hey all, it's so good to see so many faces and or names. Actually, the date, and I wrote this wrong in my bio to you, shows my inexperience, was November 9th, which was the day after November 8th. I'll do the math. It was the Wednesday after the Tuesday of the first Monday of November of 2016. It was a tough day. So I actually didn't know that that's when I was going to start writing more poetry than other things. It just turned out that way. And I still don't exactly know why, but I know the date. By way of introduction, my poems for me are sort of they're works of discovery, by which I mean that the writing of them tends to reveal what I end up learning from the writing. It's not that I start off with an idea. It's kind of like, the way I think about it is, it's like I'm dropped into this room that has all these words and images, and I rustle around and listen to the sounds and look at the images, and all of a sudden I find a door and I walk out the door, and that's sort of what I discover in the poem. There are a few where I walk in the door where I actually know where I'm going to start off, but they're mostly these works of discovery, and I'll try to identify those as we go on. And I'll start and end with a love poem. I don't actually have any poems of outrage tonight, so it is not that I am not outraged, but there are a lot of those out there, and I'm just not. They don't work for me to write them, although I love the ones that I heard tonight. So this first one also has a characteristic of a number of the poems, that it reflects living on this piece of land. It's called How to Pick the Perfect Blueberry. Find a patch of land, call it home, plant a garden, dig in leaves, shovel manure from a neighbor's barn. Repeat. Meet a beautiful woman. Buy her a post hole digger. Together, build a fence. Make love. Make babies. Raise babies who have babies. Plant blueberry bushes. Neglect them. Replant. Do better by each other. Add more manure. Protect the budding bushes from frost. Save the ripening blueberries from robins. Repeat. Admire the beautiful woman. For 40 years, admire her again and again. Smile when she follows you into the blueberry patch. And after you've picked all you can find, and she comes in behind you, fills her bowl brimming, ask her how she does it. She replies, "The blueberries find me. So, so we share this plot of land increasingly with creatures who have lived on a much broader set of acres, but the developments are closing in around us. So a number of these poems sort of reflect the more recent invasion, or I shouldn't say invasion, we're the invaders, but sort of reflect the repopulation of our plot of land, our neighborhood with our neighbors, with creatures. And this one is written from the perspective of one of those creatures. It's called Coyote. I'd near given up on these humans. They keep their toddlers too close for me to snatch. The man carries bear spray when he runs in the woods, and the woman is friends with a guy who has a night scope on his AR. That man thinks it's sport to take shots at my packmates. But then the woman brought home 2 kittens, and kittens grow up to be cats. I love cats. These people don't know that I dined on their last 2. The old gray tabby was easy prey. The brown mouser put up a fight, but in the end I prevailed. These folks are more careless with their critters than their kids. The woman hears our howls and thinks magic, but what she should be thinking is madness. She's read too many stories to her kids about my ancestors, and yes, they had special powers, could walk on their hind legs and trick men into going naked into the night. The man sees my scat in the fields and along the trails. He knows I just can't help myself. He knows I'll shit where I want and take what I can get. He knows I have more in common with his kind than not. March 11th, 2020 was the last time I was in the company of other people other than my family. It was a writing class. I think Chris was in the class, Chuck was in the class, and the pandemic was upon us. And one of the things we did was we wrote postcards from the pandemic. And this is the one that I wrote that night, March 11th, 2020, Postcard from a Pandemic. It's called From Quarantine, I Think About Growing Things. Dear children, wish you were here. Really, I do. Last week, I set seeds in little pots, greens and beets, nestled under a sweet coverlet of soil. These, I knew, would grow into a feast we'd share soon. Yet this morning, at the sight of them sprouting, nodding out of the ground as a child would from sleep, I cried in great heaves because you are far and airplanes are incubators. I will send you a packet of seeds. Care for the collards instead of you and yours. Love, Pops. It's been a long time since then. Anybody notice any anxieties around here? Any trouble sleeping? I know that especially early on, I had I'd have vivid dreams that were filled with anxiety, and when the actions and rising up after George Floyd was murdered. The anxieties were just mixed with all sorts of sense of hopeful awakening. And this was somewhat in response to a dream and somewhat obviously tinged with what was happening for me as I was awakening to new things with the rising up. It's called I Dreamt I Was a Man the Color of Coffee. I sit at a table, just me and multitudes, all without masks. None seeing the panic ping like atoms in a smasher, careening off my skull, a cavity containing all my anxieties. Each struck by another, agitating for me to be somewhere I can breathe. I cannot breathe. Not here, not with the others, each emitting isotopes, glowing with a me-seeking virus, and me asleep. I must be asleep because I find my feet wrapped in sheets, sweat seeped into my dreams, my heart beating in time with a wind-up monkey whose cymbals clang. Get me out. I can't breathe. I can't see how to get me out except to awaken. So I'm going to roll back the clock a little bit. This is sort of a ripped from the headlines. You might recall just a horrific prison sort of, I don't know what to call it, except that 7 inmates died, 17 were injured. The headline in Washington Post, 17 injured after hours of rioting in a South Carolina prison. And I decided to kind of look at those 7 people and understand their stories, find out their names, read what there was known about them. And I found one, and this is written about Ray. It's called No Surprise. Ray was out to buy some weed, and standing in the quick stop with a soda pop bottle in hand, he got shot in the chest and shot back and killed a man in front of a boy. And when they sent Ray away, no one asked what kind of soda he'd been drinking, or how his mama was after the fall she took, or what he'd dreamed that last night when he was kind of stoned, but mostly sad, that he got laid off, and he liked the feel of the Glock in his pocket, especially when he went out at night, when he wound up at Lee Correctional, and when Corey stole his goddamn cell phone. It was just too much, and he got right up in Corey's face, and then all hell broke loose, while just one guard watched through the bars as 80 men let loose a rage inevitable when one man caged gets too close to another man caged, and for the next 7 hours the bars were rattled by bones, bodies ripped by knives, and arms torn from those bodies which were stacked on top of each other like some macabre woodpile. And blood wound up on the hands of every man and every woman who put 80 angry men in a room, locked the door, and we looked in, shaking our heads, as the governor said it was not a surprise, and the rest of us said, no shit. So, how many of you, show of whatever you do, remember way, way back, I think it was August, the Democratic National Convention, there was a beautiful boy, and his name was Braden Harrington. And Braden just moved me to the core with his story of him, of Joe Biden helping him overcome his stutter. And it just made me think of what happens to boys like Braden as they grow up if they have good people in their lives. This one is called Speech Defect, and just as a warning, the bullying it describes was not quite as bad as the poem makes out. Speech Defect. A swim test, they called it, to see if I was a witch or a boy. I would not jump from that splintery dock into the ball shrinking cold, the North Woods Lake Minocqua. so the junior counselors threw me. I couldn't make it to the far side pier where the other boys, forearms draped over buoys, waded, jeered as I was fished out by my shorts, a kapok-filled orange yoke wrapped around my neck, tossed back in like a sack of fish to doggy paddle across. I was 9 when sent to summer camp, 8 weeks sunk in a sea of machismo, 7 nights a week awake, bottom bunk alone, the wild north woods howling me wide-eyed, sleepless, sniveling into a pillow that smelled like damp rags. But the worst was my glottal L and a counselor named Les. I gurgled his name like a bad brook. He was supposed to be the grown-up, but joined the boys, made me call his name, laughed like I'd shit in my pants. Those boys are grown, and Les is dead. I wonder if those men, do they suffer from their own cruelty, or have they found a vein of kindness? When they see the likes of Braden caught in his web of S's, do they sigh, forgetting, taste bile, or know how truly grateful I am for what their casual cruelty made of me? Speaking of anxiety, it's a sort of a quick one. One of the people on this call introduced me to Twitter. His Twitter handle is Innonate, and I am Innonate's dad on Twitter. And over the summer, I have used it as a news feed, which is very good for that, but it's also very good for making an anxious time awful. Just take something bad and make it worse. This is called No Words, an homage to Twitter. At the end of the day, when I should be sleeping, I doom scroll, look to see what I can of the state of democracy. What indignity has one of the deplorables said? Whither, Texas? How long are the lines in Georgia? I supply no words into the bleak screen. Just eat from this stew of spiced bile, of white rage spittle, of oozing suet that rolls from TV people's disembodied lips, gristle picked from the teeth of campaign surrogates. I scroll and read the polls, click again, wonder when it will end. When is the right time to stop obsessing? When will I ever sleep easy? When should I? And how can I stop, lest the stew eats me? So sometime a poem takes you to a place that you can't imagine. And this is one that started with a deer sighting and ended up, well, the title lets you know where it ends up. A letter from a son to his dying mother. And the epigraph is from a guy named William Shakespeare, these but the trappings and the suits of woe. I came across the path of a pair of deer, a doe and her yearling, as surprised as I. The mama's musk overwhelmed the other spring smells as she stepped between me and her teen. He, a young buck just budding, splayed his legs and darted off. The mother stood her ground, reminded me of you. That time I found out you knew my draft lottery number before I did, told me 30 years later. That time in 1969, you cried after asking me if I smoked pot because you knew my leaving the nest was at hand. That time you secretly asked my best friend to fix me up with girls because you knew I was lonely. Suspected I liked boys, which would have been okay so long as I had someone. That time when I introduced you to my betrothed, the woman I'd known so little time, and you chose not to tell me how you, a war bride, learned you knew nothing about your man and less about yourself, might never have stayed with him if you had. And now you cannot tell me how much it hurts, trapped behind that dying mind. Months ago, when a few of your words still connected one to the next, we cried together. I held you. We sat on the floor, and I read to you from a form that said, "Do not resuscitate. Do not defibrillate. Let me die," you said. Again and again I asked, and you scratched your name on the bottom line. Your pain is not my pain, but it makes me feel better to say so as I decide whether the oblivion of one morphine patch or two is best. Jim, do I have time for this many more? Okay. That's a 3 for those of you who are. So more critters, and I should give you a trigger warning on this. This one has dead critters. So if that's a problem, it's a little, yeah. So we share this ground that we're on, not just with neighbors, but we've had generations of hunters who have hunted here before we moved here, and we still have the descendants of those people who hunt. And they're sort of as much part of this land as we are in many respects, as you'll hear. We share a lot in common, but there's a lot of uncommon ground, which is the title. 1. Steve pulled back the tarp, revealed the bloodless head, the rack intact, of the buck he felled with one clean shot. For 30 days of autumn dawns, he'd sat strapped to the stand 30 feet up in the old sycamore, his back to the creek, his eyes on the edge where the scrub wood becomes field. He'd held with his hands, which were numbed with the waiting, a longbow nocked, ready to let loose a shaft into the darkest part of the 12-pointer he'd spied for weeks from too far away. Until today. 2. Once at dusk, not long ago, he missed the heart of what must have been the king of our small wood, a mighty one who did not drop when shot, who bolted through the copse, arrows shafting from his side, vanished as if an apparition in the falling night, dripped a trail of liquid rubies, spots of blood on fallen leaves. Steve scrambled from his stand to track the tortured prey, longed to make his kill complete, to relieve the creature of its suffering. But right at last light, rain began to fall, washed away the red stains, rendered the trail mute. Steve wept the tears of Tantalus, blundered into the dark, heaved hopeless breaths, much like the stumbling buck. 3. Steve showed me his new hardware, a camo-clad night scope slotted atop his AR. He ran his hand from barrel to stock, eyed the sight, said to me, "I'll try to take out that giant coyote tonight, the one that stared you down the other day." I am grateful, though I know this man who loves the sun rising over our creek, stills his breath to match the windless dawns, hears the morning whisper, amen. This man who hauls in his saw to take out deadfalls, helps wherever he can, calls our place Eden. Yes, this man of Saxon build flies the yellow flag. On it, a coiled snake that hisses, "Don't you fucking tread on me." So I suspect, late at night, he stews in dark juices, is sure the news is fake, believes there are elites out to replace his kind, surely knows that I must be one of those he is wary of. The big sister in this poem is on the call someplace. I can't see. So bullying happens, right? A lot of us grew up either being bullies or bullying, right? Or being oblivious to it. It's sort of like was part of at least the life of many people when I was growing up. And this is a little bit about that in my life. It's not a pretty picture of me. Life as seen from the wilderness. My big sister thought to teach me to fight. Took me to the backyard, curled my fingers in hers, formed a fist, told me to hit her hard or she'd hit me. I didn't. She didn't. And so it seemed the reason the bigger boys kept at it. Kept throwing my books over the chain-link fence, kept scattering them into the woods preserve, kept watching me crawl under twisted wire, snag my shorts, soil everything, they hooting on one side, me standing small on the other. I clutch my books, wipe the drivel from my nose, wait for the boys to get bored, listen to their laughter, watch them point, beg them to leave, long to be just like them. Oh, get the mouse working here. So I will end up with a little love poem, just a little one. It's called First Kiss. You like lemons. I like apples. Each morning, I pull a ripe apple from the bowl, place it on the same cutting board on which you sliced your lemon. You, a lemon for your morning tea. I, an apple for my breakfast, sliced in a puddle of lemon juice. Their flavors mingle in my mouth. Our first kiss of the day. Thank you all. You've been very patient with a lot of poems. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone who has shown up today. Look forward to hearing more poems.
I'm going to ask everybody to unmute for a moment and give it up for Dick Westheimer this week.
Great. Well done, Dick. Yes.
Well done. Well done.
Yes. Dick,
Great reading, Dick. Excellent.
tonight
Absolutely.
have again reminded me, and I think everybody else, why we continue to do this and why it is so important to our hearts and minds. Thank you. Thank you. And that is from me, and I think from everybody else tonight. Just a lovely and heart-wrenching reading. So